Brian Robinson is a superstar.
Seriously.
I would argue that getting signed to the Commanders is worse than being shot twice, and I think that's really what's holding him back more than anything.
That's a fair criticism.
As the illustrious Nicki Minaj once said, I guess those ass shots wore off. That's all I got to say.
That's a wet-ass perspective right there, dude. I love that.
I've got two takeaways, massive takeaways, one positive, one negative from the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. Number one, Washington running back Brian Robinson is a superstar. He led the league in fantasy football in all point formats.
Even beat the Dallas Cowboys defense? That's insane, bro.
Brian Robinson didn't play the Cowboys, did he?
No, I'm just saying the Dallas Cowboys defense have been like the number one seed. Like anybody that took them early in the fantasy draft is looking like a genius right now.
I see what you're saying. You also look like a genius if you did take Brian Robinson from the Washington Commanders. He looks exactly how we thought he looked. And I think Andrew and I were talking about this on a previous episode where it was like, hey, wild take here out of two medical experts, a nurse and a chiropractor, maybe a guy who gets shot twice in the ass in the preseason, might look a little bit slower to start that season. Maybe will look a little bit faster towards the end of that season. Maybe he earned that spot as a rookie from Antonio Gibson for a reason. And maybe he's going to come out this year and look way more explosive, way faster, more comfortable with the offense now that he gets to practice because he doesn't have lead in his ass anymore. I don't think this should have been a massive surprise, and I think it's absolutely startling. I'm going to tweet every single week, hey, just a friendly reminder, Antonio Gibson in virtually all fantasy football drafts went ahead of Brian Robinson, and I'll never be able to explain why. And you just watch the game, and it just screams talent off the screen, and I'm just like, why didn't we see this coming? It's just like a massive error, I think, in the thought process of a lot of the experts, is that they're so dependent upon history. And when unprecedented things happen, like what we're seeing in Colorado with Coach Prime, like what we're seeing with Brian Robinson, who got shot twice. I don't think we've ever had a player get shot twice in the ass, a running back that is, come back from that injury. Unprecedented things, you got to like look at it and like kind of watch the film and just like turn on the highlight film from last year. Like early on when he came back from that injury, came out to many men, looked a little bit slow, looked a little bit uncomfortable. Towards the end of that season when nobody was watching because he was on the Washington Commanders, he looked way better. He looked way faster. And I think we're just seeing more momentum coming off of that with Brian Robinson. I'll leave it to Andrew. What are your thoughts on Brian Robinson right now?
I mean, I love it. And it's exactly what we talked about in the preseason.
Yeah.
This is a guy who was a 5-star high school recruit coming out of high school. Mm-hmm. He backed up Najee. He backed up Josh Jacobs. Every time he got a little bit of snippet of playing time, he looked good. He had juice in his legs. The fact that he got shot twice in the leg last year and still came back, that's the insane thing. He wasn't on IR for the whole season. He came back and was getting like 15, 20 touches a game. It was a half step slow, but coming in this season, you're kind of like, hey, if he came back from getting shot twice and he didn't get shot twice this year, he's got to be better.
Yeah, that was the only thing that was going to hold him back, right? If he got shot again in Washington.
Seriously.
I would argue that getting signed to the Commanders is worse than being shot twice, and I think that's really what's holding him back more than anything.
That's a fair criticism. Hey, they're last time I checked, undefeated, right? Washington Commanders. Am I
2-0, baby?
Yeah, 2-0. He's had an interesting start to the season. They've definitely been riding Brian Robinson a lot. If you have a B Robinson stack in fantasy football, which I do in multiple leagues, best ball in one home league, you're loving life right now. Brian Robinson and Bijan Robinson. James, closing thoughts on my positive takeaway after 2 weeks of the NFL season, Brian Robinson.
As the illustrious Nicki Minaj once said, I guess those ass shots wore off. That's all I got to say.
Well said, which gets to my negative.
That's a wet-ass perspective right there, dude. I love that.
Which takes me to my negative. I was positive first. Now I'm going to be negative. And these are both things that I kind of called preseason, and we're kind of just seeing it right now. The bust of this rookie draft was the first wide receiver taken. He plays for the Seahawks and is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I do not think he is the best wide receiver in this draft class. I don't think he's a top 3 wide receiver in this draft class. I don't think he's a top 5 wide receiver in this draft class. I think he's somewhere around the 6 range, at least where we are. I think we heard a lot of talk and we got brainwashed into thinking, we just saw the production he had in college, and we just got brainwashed over the draft cycle. Like, yeah, this guy's good. Don't worry about that 40 time. He plays a lot faster on the field. He has a knack for getting open. His previous teammates, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, said he's the next best thing since them. And they're kind of saying like, hey, this guy was better than us. Had a big injury in college, which everyone was like, hey, his last year in college film, throw it in the wastebasket, doesn't matter. And I was watching it and I'm like, man, I don't know. Then we saw a couple little highlights from training camp on one-on-one drills. And then when the 11-on-11 drills came around, that hype kind of faded. Nobody was talking about him. He was just kind of like, he was the guy. He's the number 1 wide receiver because we said he was the number 1 wide receiver. And I think we're seeing now, I'm pulling up stats on my phone because I prepared for this show, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. What's concerning even more so is that he is getting plays written up for him. He is getting opportunities because he was the first wide receiver taken in this draft with the first-round pick for the Seattle Seahawks. He is getting the opportunity, even though that maybe he doesn't deserve it, over less draft capital guys like Jake Bobo from UCLA, who's also on the team. Second-year guy, didn't play his first year with an injury. 5 targets game 1, 6 targets game 2, for a total of 3 receptions and 5 yards, 3 receptions and 5 receptions, 13 yards, 34 yards, 4.3 yards per catch, 6.8 yards per catch in week 2. Compare that to Michael Wilson, who's had a disappointing season thus far, but yards per target, yards per catch 9.5, yards per catch 18.6, playing for the Cardinals. He doesn't have Geno Smith throwing him the ball. He has a throwaway trade, who got outcompeted by rookie from UCLA from the Browns throwing him the football. A guy who was brought in, maybe he gets a little more comfortable with the organization. A guy who was brought in last second because DTR played so well from the Browns as the backup. Obviously, Puka Nacua. Any argument there? Do I need to read stats for Puka Nacua? Clearly better than Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Zay Flowers. Do I need to say anything about him? Stats-wise, clearly better than Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Jordan Addison, 6 targets, 5 targets, 10 yards per target, 14 yards per target. That's not even per catch. He's blowing JSN out of the water. Jonathan Mingo, a little bit similar in the terms of production, but yards per catch, 8.5, yards per catch, 8.6. He's got Bryce Young throwing him the football, not a veteran throwing him the football like we're seeing with Jaxon Smith-Njigba at Seattle. Also, Jonathan Mingo, probably the number 1 target there, like probably the best wide receiver there in Carolina. JSN has DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett absorbing all of this attention from him, and he's still not producing on a per target basis, on a per catch basis like he should be, like a guy like Jaden Reed is for the Green Bay Packers, who's getting a lot of the attention taken away from Romeo Doubs and probably, hopefully next week, Christian Watson. And he's averaging 24 yards per catch and 9.2 yards per catch in week 2. Jaden Reed also having some pretty good touchdown luck early on. What did I miss? Why were we so high on Jaxon Smith-Njigba, James, coming out of college?
I mean, pretty easy to get open if I have Marvin Harrison Jr. Lining up with me. I think I could probably get probably 50, 60 yards a game if that was the situation. Also, on an Ohio State offense that was always putting up a lot of points. He has the athleticism. I think, maybe we can chalk some of this up to learning the system. But, if you're a Division I college football athlete, you have something there.
With all due respect.
I think he lost some with that injury, I think is what we're probably seeing, in my opinion. Yeah. And then I also think, it does not bode well that if he is wide receiver 3 with Lockett and DK Metcalf, that he's not getting those catches like he was at Ohio State with Marvin Harrison Jr. So I agree with you that he does seem to be a bust here. All best wishes to Jaxon, but yeah, they might need to start reconsidering that, or Seattle can figure out how to do time travel and redo that draft pick.
Yeah, who if you had to redo the draft, who would you take? Would it be Quentin Johnston? Would it be Puka Nacua, James? Would it be Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers? Who would you take with that first wide receiver pick? Who, if you could redraft going back in time, who would you take, James?
Yeah, if I'm Seattle, we've already got slot sort of area locked down with Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, more of a deep threat. So probably Jordan Addison fits the most, in my opinion, in that situation.
Okay. Andrew, who would you take if you redraft? Would it be JSN? First wide receiver off the board?
No. I'm rocking the Seattle shirt today. 12th man, not behind JSN. We would take Puka. 12th man would take Puka.
Miles, any last thoughts on everything I just said?
I'd go with Puka only because you bid half of your free agency acquisition budget on him this last week. So I feel like that must mean he's important.
Yeah, I turned on that film. I saw the production. I had him. He was a guy, Puka Nacua for the LA Rams, got thrust into the starting role with the loss of Cooper Kupp, and now I'm thinking, like, what is this offense going to look like with Cooper Kupp on the field? That offensive line seems to be able to block all of a sudden, at least for the pass. And Matt Stafford looks like he is in Super Bowl Matt Stafford form right now. When he's healthy, Matt Stafford is still an absolute legend. I think he's got a little bit more tread on the tires than we all think. Hyper targeting. I think he had like over 50% of target share. Puka Nacua did. I did bid up on all of my home leagues that he was available. I used draft or waiver priority and 50% of my fab in other leagues on him. If Puka Nacua was still on your waivers somehow in a 12-team league after seeing what he did in week 2, what percentage of your fab are you betting on Puka Nacua to get him on your team for week 3?
95% to 100% of it.
Right?
Wow. Absolutely.
Okay.
He's a game changer. He's a game changer. You're talking about a guy getting a guy off of waivers in a PPR league that's probably going to average anywhere between 18 and 26 points every week. And he hasn't even scored a touchdown yet. That's the insane thing. Like, he's not scoring touchdowns yet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Stafford did miss him deep. He was wide open in week 1 where he would have gone absolutely nuclear, like an Anquan Bolden style rookie week 1 performance. JSN, not the best pick. I think anybody who had 2 brain cells and kind of like their own free thought could kind of see that coming, just based on the other athletes that we had in this draft. Like, I'm not saying this guy is like not going to be in the NFL next year on the form of like a N'Keal Harry trajectory. I just think he's going to be more of like a middling, like hopefully develop into a wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 3, moving. Andrew, you're like, no, he's a total bust.
He's walking the Jalen Reagor line. I'm feeling Jalen Reagor vibes off of him.
His body language is shitty. He looks super frustrated. He looks super unhappy with kind of, I think because he's been told he's the best for so long, and he's maybe just been like riding off of that momentum. I don't know exactly what it is. So you're even lower on him than I am.
He's a local. He's a Texas guy. He's from Rockwall High School, actually, if you didn't know. So I've heard coming out of high school, he was one of the best wide receivers they've ever seen in the state. But when he got to Ohio State, he didn't start right away. The thing is, Garrett Wilson and Olave were ahead of him. And I think he might have had one season where he put up 1,000 yards with them, but he never led the team by himself. That's my whole thing with him. He never carried the boat by himself.
Yep. Any last thoughts, Miles, James?
No, I think Andrew summed it up perfectly.
Yeah, I think you're way more passionate than I could pretend to be.
I love it.